Thank you, Senator Graham. I want to thank both of you for your decades of dedicated service in intelligence and law enforcement and for your testimony here today. The question before us is one of really grave consequence. As you suggested in your opening statements, really an existential threat to our democracy, which, if not faced appropriately, will simply encourage increased aggressive actions. The reality is that a foreign adversary intentionally influenced our 2016 presidential election. And our president may not want to confront this, but it is a reality and one that our U.S. intelligence community agreed about with very high confidence. I greatly appreciate Senators Graham and Whitehouse in convening this hearing and in treating this very real threat to our democracy with the seriousness that it deserves. Former Director Clapper, in your opening statement, you suggested that the Russians should be celebrating and that they are likely emboldened because they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams and at minimal cost, and they are likely to continue. In the French national elections, which just concluded yesterday, there was a stunning dump of hacked emails at the last moment in an attempt, I at least believe, to influence the outcome of that election in a way designed to help advance a candidate favored by the Kremlin. And in that instance, there was a significant amount of fake news, of manufactured articles mixed in with seemingly actual emails that had been hacked. And there are allegations that there was coordination between alt-right news sites trying to forward this information and to get it out around France and around the world. Is that your understanding of what's just happened in France? And more importantly, was there any evidence that you saw of comparable coordination between alt-right news sites and released information in the attempts to influence the 2016 American presidential election?
Senator Coons, I honestly, all I know is what I'm reading in the media, and so I don't have access to any intelligence information that would help me cast any light or could authoritatively answer your question. All I know is it's what's in the media.
But during the period when you did have regular access to intelligence, did you see any evidence to suggest that the longstanding Russian practice of spreading misinformation and fake news was being amplified by news sites in the United States, and any reason to believe that might have been coordinated or intentional?
Well, I don't know about the latter, but I think some news outlets were probably unwitting of that. It certainly went on, but I can't say to what extent that was coordinated intentionally with certain news outlets. And again, that's a kind of in the domestic realm.
You said that the Russians will continue this behavior until we impose some significant costs. Could you speak briefly to what sort of actions you think we might take that would deter them from continuing this action?
That's a little over my labor grade as an intelligence guy. I thought the sanctions that we did impose, and I was part of that as part of the former administration, were a great first step.
Well, I'll simply say that I agree with you, and a bipartisan bill led by my colleague Senator Graham and co-sponsored by 20 senators, Republican and Democrat, would be a terrific next step. Ms. Yates, we've established in the course of these questions that on December 27th and 29th, former National Security Advisor General Flynn discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador. So when the Trump transition team told the Washington Post on January 13th that sanctions were not discussed, was that false?
I understand that there have been news reports to that account, but I can't confirm whether, in fact, those conversations regarding sanctions occurred, because that would require me to reveal classified information.
Understood. So I have a whole series of questions about things that would have been untrue. Were that the case, you're not going to be able to answer any of those?
Not to the extent that it goes to General Flynn's underlying conduct. I can't address that.
Well, then let me move to that, if I might.
Sure.
On January 24th, you just testified that National Security Advisor Flynn was interviewed by the FBI about his underlying conduct, and that that underlying conduct was problematic because it led to the conclusion the vice president was relying on falsehoods. What was that underlying conduct, and are you convinced that the former National Security Advisor was truthful in his testimony to the FBI on January 24?
Again, I hate to frustrate you again, but I think we're going to have to, because my knowledge of his underlying conduct is based on classified information. And so I can't reveal what that underlying conduct is. It's why I had to do sort of an artificial description here of events without revealing that conduct.
I understand that. On January 27th, you just testified that you discussed with White House Counsel McGahn 4 different topics. And one of them included the possibility of criminal prosecution of the former National Security Advisor and what would the applicable statutes be. What applicable statutes did you discuss? And in your conclusion, should the National Security Advisor face criminal prosecution?
Senator Coons, I'm going to strike out here because if I identify the statute, then that would be insight into what the conduct was. And look, I'm not trying to be hyper-technical here. I'm trying to be really careful that I observe my responsibilities to protect classified information. And so I can't identify the statute.
Okay. Do you believe the administration took your warnings seriously when you made this extraordinary effort to go to the White House and in-person brief the White House counsel on the 26th and 27th? Do you think they took appropriate steps with regards to General Flynn as the National Security Advisor, given that he remained a frequent participant in very high-level national security matters for 2 weeks?
Well, certainly in the course of the meetings, both on the 26th and 27th, Mr. McGahn certainly demonstrated that he understood that this was serious. So he did seem to be taking it seriously. I don't have any way of knowing what, if anything, they did. If nothing was done, then certainly that would be concerning.
So you don't know whether they took any steps to restrict his access to classified information, to investigate him further, up and until the Washington Post published information that made it clear that he had been lying to the Vice President?
No, again, I was gone after the 30th, and so I wouldn't know if any steps had been communicated to the Department of Justice, but I was not aware of any, no.
Had you not been summarily fired, would you have recommended to the White House counsel that they begin further investigations into the National Security Advisor, or that they restrict his access to sensitive and classified information?
Well, it's a bit of a hypothetical. Had I remained at the Department of Justice, and if I were under the impression that nothing had been done, then yes, I would have raised it again with the White House.
Thank you, Ms. Yates. Thank you, Mr. Clapper.